From the very beginning, it was clear that my sister was the sun in my parents' universe, and I was nothing more than a shadow orbiting around her glow. She was showered with affection, praise, and endless attention, while I often went unnoticed in the same room. If she laughed, they laughed louder. If she cried, they rushed to comfort her. But when I tried to share something, their responses were often distracted, half-hearted, or absent altogether. I would sit in the corner, watching the scene unfold, wondering why their love seemed so one-sided. It felt as though I was invisible in my own home, a guest who happened to live there, rather than a child they had brought into the world. As a child, I tried everything I could think of to win their attention. I would bring home drawings from school, full of bright colors and imagination, and rush to show them off. My pictures often ended up stacked in a pile, forgotten on the table, while my sister's doodles were proudly hung on the refrigerator for everyone to see. When I earned excellent grades, my father barely nodded, as if it was expected and not worth mentioning. Yet when my sister passed a test, even with average marks, it was celebrated like a national holiday: ice cream, presents, and endless praise. The imbalance was so obvious that even relatives noticed, but no one dared to say anything aloud. The hardest part wasn't the lack of gifts or celebrations, but the absence of acknowledgment. I craved to hear the words, "We're proud of you," but they never came my way. Instead, silence filled the spaces where love should have lived. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with me. Was I not smart enough? Not beautiful enough? Not lovable enough? Those questions became heavy stones in my chest, ones I carried with me everywhere I went. The pain of being overlooked was sharper than any punishment could have been, because it wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. I remember birthdays the most vividly. My sister's birthdays were always grand events, decorated with balloons, cakes, and presents piled high on the table. Friends and family gathered to celebrate her, cameras flashing to capture every moment. Mine, on the other hand, were quiet days, sometimes forgotten altogether or overshadowed by her needs. A simple dinner, maybe a rushed, happy birthday, and nothing more. On more than one occasion, there wasn't even a cake. I smiled through it, pretending not to care, but deep inside, the neglect cut scars that no one could see. Birthdays were supposed to remind you of how loved and cherished you were, but for me, they were reminders of how easily I could be overlooked. But as the years went on, something inside me began to shift. I realized that waiting for them to see me was like waiting for rain in a desert; it would never come. Slowly, I began to understand that my worth could not depend on their recognition. Instead of letting the pain crush me, I started using it as fuel. If they would not acknowledge me, I would make the world acknowledge me. The emptiness that once made me cry now sparked determination. A voice inside whispered, "You don't need them to tell you who you are. You'll show them by becoming someone they can't ignore." I threw myself into my studies, not because I wanted their attention anymore, but because I wanted freedom. Books became my companions, teachers became my mentors, and knowledge became my escape from the walls of neglect. While they were too busy applauding my sister's every step, I was silently building a foundation of resilience. I would stay up late, reading and learning long after the house had gone quiet. Every page I turned felt like a step away from them and a step toward the future I wanted. When I finally left home, I carried with me not bitterness, but fire. I knew I had to survive on my own, because there was no safety net waiting for me. I worked tirelessly, juggling jobs to pay rent and tuition. There were days I skipped meals to save money, nights I stayed awake working when my body begged for rest. But the neglect I had endured had already toughened me. I was used to being alone, used to not having anyone to fall back on. That pain became my armor, and I wore it proudly. Over time, my sacrifices began to bear fruit. I earned scholarships that took me further than I ever imagined. I found mentors who believed in me and encouraged me in ways my parents never did. With each small victory, whether it was a published paper, a promotion, or a new skill mastered, I grew stronger. I learned to celebrate myself in ways they never had. My achievements became my proof, not for them, but for me, that I was worthy, that I was enough. My career blossomed in ways that even I could barely believe at first. I climbed ladders others hesitated to step on, broke barriers I was told were unbreakable, and created a life of independence and influence. Strangers admired me for my perseverance, mentors respected me for my dedication, and friends looked up to me for my strength. I had built an empire of self-worth, brick by brick, without their help. The very silence that once hurt me had been transformed into the motivation that carried me forward. Ironically, while my sister was still being coddled at home, dependent on their support, I was learning how to thrive in the real world. She had grown accustomed to their constant praise, while I had grown accustomed to fighting for everything I had. Slowly, the contrast between us became clear, even to them. I was becoming someone the world admired, while she remained sheltered, unprepared for the challenges of life outside their bubble. It was only when others began to speak about me that my parents took notice. At family gatherings, relatives asked about my achievements with pride in their voices. Their friends mentioned hearing my name in professional circles, seeing my work on platforms they respected. My parents' expressions shifted from indifference to surprise, as though they were hearing about a stranger. It was almost comical. Only when the world validated me did they begin to realize what I had become. Then came the calls. At first, they were awkward and hesitant. A brief, "How are you?" here, a curious question there. They wanted to know where I lived, what I did, who I had become. I could sense the curiosity underneath their words, but also something else, an uneasiness, a regret slowly beginning to take root. It was as though they were suddenly realizing how much they had missed out on, and the realization was too heavy to ignore. Their regret grew clearer with time. They tried to reconnect, making awkward attempts to bridge the years of silence with small gestures. I could hear the longing in their voices, the unspoken apologies hidden between the lines. They were beginning to see just how much of my life they had lost, birthdays they ignored, graduations they skipped, victories they dismissed. It was dawning on them that while they were busy favoring my sister, I had slipped through their fingers. But by the time their regret became undeniable, I had already learned how to live without them. I had built my own family of choice, friends who celebrated my victories, mentors who guided me, and colleagues who respected me. I no longer needed their approval, nor did I crave their recognition. The child who once cried herself to sleep wishing for their love had grown into an adult who knew her worth. When they finally tried to apologize, I listened, but I no longer felt the ache I once did. I had found peace in knowing that I was enough, with or without them. Their regret could not undo the years of silence, nor could it replace the love I had missed out on. But strangely, I didn't hate them. I had outgrown the bitterness. I realized that I had gained something from their neglect that I wouldn't trade: strength. Standing before them one day, I saw the truth etched into their faces. The pride they never showed me as a child was finally there, mixed with shame and sorrow. And I realized something profound. I had become everything I once dreamed of, not because of them, but in spite of them. The neglect that once threatened to break me had forged me into someone unshakable. I had built my life from the ground up, without their applause, and that made it even more meaningful. So even though they came to regret their choices, I remained steady. I no longer longed for their validation, nor did I seek their forgiveness. I had already learned how to shine without anyone holding the light for me. My success was my own, my strength was my own, and my life was fuller than I ever imagined it could be, even if they had never truly been a part of it. And in that realization, I found freedom.